Phil Ivey, arguably the best poker player in the world, is so good at reading opponents that he can almost always adapt his game to beat whomever else he is up against. He's a master of body language, behavior, and speech play.
He's got all kinds of tricks.
Here are some of Phil Ivey's most amazing poker reads, where he destroyed his opponents with genius-level strategy. Starting with a read on Mike McDonald, Phil Ivey looks down to nines and raises it to 16,000 pre-flop. On the other side of the table, Mike McDonald, one of the most successful young poker players ever, is known for his aggressive play, and with King-Queen suited, Mike isn't going anywhere. The flop comes, Jack, 10, Jack, and Ivey is still ahead, but it's a dangerous board for his pocket nines. With no hearts on the table, McDonald is looking at an up and down straight draw with two strong overcards. Ivey puts 25,000 into the pot, with Mike calling to see a turn card. His bet pays off immediately when a queen is flipped over, giving Mike top pair as well as an open-ended straight draw. But Ivey is about to use aggression to devastating effect. He doesn't give Mike any space to take control, firing off 60,000, a bet that's more than half of the pot. Mike is in a tight spot despite being ahead and having position. Ivey's pocket nines are relatively weak on this board, but he's representing plenty of draws that would have made it by now. Mike looks over to get a read on Ivey. Mike later said in an interview that one time, Ivey made a face and caused him to burst into laughter. That was enough of a sign to tell him how strong Mike's hand was. But for Ivey, his poker face doesn't crack, and it's almost useless to try and extract information from his body language. Facing too much risk to continue the hand, Mike folds, despite being comfortably in the lead in most matchups. At the 2018 Super High Rollers cash game, Ivey went up against Antonio Esfandiari, also known as the Magician, in a huge pot. The hand started with Jennifer Tilly raising 15K to double the pot, but she couldn't get rid of Ivey or Esfandiari that easily, who both called behind with suited hands. The flop comes 7, 8, and 10, which is good news for both. Ivey is on a flush draw and a straight draw, but this is completely dominated by Esfandiari, who has made the nuts straight on the flop. Tilly continues with the 30K bet, but after Esfandiari ups the stakes to 100,000, she wisely gets out of the way. Ivey flat calls, and the turn make him a top pair. Esfandiaro is still a 3-1 favorite, and he throws out a 150K bet for good measure, trying to represent a draw or a bluff. With almost $500,000 in the pot now, most players would struggle to lay down top pair on this board.
This is completely absurd. He has to get through him, and then he has to get through me. And then, no, this is just a fold.
There aren't too many hands that have Ivey's pair of kings beat, especially because he's holding two of the spades, blocking plenty of flush draws. Plus, he could still make a straight on the river. But to the shock of everyone, including the Magician, Ivey showed his masterful reading abilities and folded his hand. It means that he knew exactly what Esfandiari had. In a vintage hand on the Full Tilt Poker $1 Million cash game, Ivey didn't have trouble seeing straight through Mike the Mouth Matusow. Ivey opens up the betting with a straddle, and the action folds to Mike Matusow, who is infamous for his trash-talking and aggressive moves. With the second best starting hand in poker, pocket kings, Mike is feeling confident, at least for now, and he raises to 4.7K. David Benjamin comes along for the ride with a pair of threes, and of course, Ivey, who has a suited ace-4. It's a pretty weak hand, but Ivey can turn anything into a monster. The flop brings in a bottom pair for Ivey. Mike's overpair is still stronger, and he throws an 11K continuation bet, almost 3/4 of the pot. Ivey might have suspected a strong pocket pair from Mike. For now, though, he's happy to see the turn, which pairs the board with two jacks, adding a third club. A quick check-check leads to the river, where a fourth club gives Matusow's king of clubs the second best flush, making him confident enough to fire a 15K bet. But this was a fatal mistake. Ivey takes notice of Mike's relatively weak value bet, sensing an opportunity to attack. If Mike doesn't have the best possible hand, then Ivey can represent it. This is exactly what he does, with a huge re-raise to double the pot to over $100,000 and flip the pressure back onto Mike. The only question in Mike's mind is whether Ivey could have an ace of clubs or a full house. Mike is usually full of speech play, taunting, and running his mouth.
Mike, what's the secret to your success?
I'm the best player here.
But he's been jammed into an uncomfortable spot here and barely talks at all. He goes into the tank to have a deep think. This kind of play is well within Ivey's range. After a torturous few minutes, Mike painfully lets go and folds his hand, and the look on his face says it all. He's disgusted, and watching the hand back later, he would have been gutted to learn that Ivey outplayed him, reading him like a book. Next up, during a 7-hour Your Hustler Casino live session, Ivey's reading abilities were again put to the test against Andy Stacks, a well-known high-stakes player hailing from Taiwan. Andy was saying earlier in the session how much of an honor it was to play the legend of Phil Ivey, and he was about to get a personal masterclass on why Ivey is so good. The action comes around to Andy, who has King, 9 of spades, and he raises to 2.4k, pushing out any weaker hands before the flop. Ivey, with ace, king offsuit, doesn't blink, calling Andy down and taking it to a flop. At this point, Ivey is ahead with 2 overcards, but Andy's hand is suited, and sure enough, on the flop, 2 spades spell disaster for Ivey. Andy is 1 card away from completing his flush, and he decides to slow play it, checking. Then, the worst card comes on the turn, the ace of spades. It completes a flush for Andy, giving him the best possible hand. The only thing Andy has to worry about now is how to extract the maximum money from Ivey. Ivey's made a top pair, meaning that it's not an easy decision to lay his hand down. Andy puts out a 28k bet, hoping to disguise his monster with an overbet. Ivey knows something is up, looking over to Andy for a read and silently observing body language, running the hand through his head again. Whatever it is he picks up on, it's enough to make the right decision, mucking with top pair.
Something? Huh? A little something, something. Do you have anything? Yeah, something. You got something?
It proves once again that value betting Phil Ivey is almost impossible. Andy was the big winner of the stream, ending the session at $858 in chips, more than $600,000 than he started with, while Ivey scooped up more than $150,000 for his troubles. Here, Ivey is sitting across from Andrew Feldman, who broke through into the poker world barely aged 18, but this hand shows how he's managed to keep up with generations of younger players. Feldman looks down at a strong king-queen suited and raises pre-flop to 2k. Ivey is sitting on a queen, 4 offsuit, and re-raises to 7k, which Feldman calls immediately. The flop misses both of them, and while Feldman takes his time to check the action through, Ivey bets 11k, bringing the pot up to over $26,000. Feldman responds twice as hard, re-raising Ivey 28k, the size of the pot, and now Ivey needs an accurate read more than ever. Otherwise, he could be walking into a trap. The turn is an 8 of clubs, making a possible flush for plenty of hands. But Ivey seems to know that Feldman isn't holding on to a flush draw. Feldman checks, hoping to see a free card. Ivey isn't letting him off the hook that easily though, firing again with a 27k bet. And after calculating which positions he would be ahead in, Feldman is forced to muck his king-queen in defeat, despite having a 93% chance of winning the hand. At the 2021 Aussie Millions High Roller event, Phil Ivey had already gone head-to-head with Dan Cates, aka Jungleman, a few times that night. But this hand is different. Jungleman is dealt pocket 5s and raises to 2,500 pre-flop, more than half the pot. Ivey, with ace, queen, is the only one to call. The board gives Ivey a pair of aces, while Jungleman misses everything. His continuation bet of 4,000 keeps him in control, but Ivey wasn't phased, taking the hand to a turn, which blanks out a 9. Jungleman is known for having one of the widest ranges in game, and his aggressive playing style makes him unpredictable. He's also one of the best heads-up players of all time, once issuing an open challenge to anyone brave enough to face him in a live high-stakes match. One of the only top pros to accept, Tom Dwan, ended up losing over $1.5 million. Taking it to the river, Ivey knows how dangerous Jungleman can be. The river is a 7 of hearts, and Ivey's pair of aces is holding up, but he could potentially be up against a straight or a set. At least, that's what Jungleman wants to represent, and he bets 28,000 to try and push Ivey out of the hand. After almost a minute of tanking and weighing his options, Ivey makes the correct read and calls, scooping up a $92,000 pot. In the finals of Shark Cage Season 2, Ivey was head-to-head with his longtime rival, Daniel Negreanu, another poker master known for his uncanny reading ability. Negreanu raises 50,000 with a 9-6 offsuit. Ivey hangs in with a call, hoping to hit something with his slightly better queen 7 offsuit. The flop comes 8 jack queen, making Ivey's top pair a little more appealing. Looking to push Ivey off balance, Negreanu pushes a $125,000 bet into the middle, more than half the pot. But the look in Ivey's eyes says it all. With a smile on his face, Ivey dares Daniel to put his money where his mouth is, dropping his chips on the felt with an all-in.
Yeah, he's got all kinds of tricks. He does that to see what I do with my eyes and stuff, and then he does it. I gotta stop looking.
That makes the pot 1.2 million. And this deep in the competition, a hand like this could easily decide who wins or loses. Daniel couldn't help but laugh. These two know each other's games back to front, having played for decades. Negreanu has openly declared Ivey the greatest player of all time.
The king of poker and the GOAT is Phil Ivey.
And he knows when to fold, taking only a few moments to accept the loss. That session ended up being Daniel's night though, with the Canadian taking home over $1 million in prize money for winning the tournament. Here, Ivey was down to the final tour at the 2015 Aussie Millions. When he sniffed a chance to take Doug Poke out, he took it. McDonald exits the hand before the flop, while Ivey calls a 31K raise to take on Doug heads up. Ivey has a hand with big potential, a 9-10 offsuit, but it's a coin flip with Doug's ace, 4 offsuit, who is looking for either an overpair or a possible gut shot straight draw. The two have similar chip stacks and are in the running for the $2.2 million first prize. And the flop is good news for both of them. Ivey makes the top pair, while Doug is now 1 card away from a straight, while he still has the strongest overcard, an ace. Doug and Ivey check through to the river, which brings nothing new for either of them. The question is whether Ivey can get Doug to put his money in. With Ivey to act, he pushes in a pot-sized bet of $200,000, trying not to scare Doug off. Doug has a lot to think about here. There's a low-valued board, including a pair of 2s. If Ivey were trying to represent something and steal the pot, he would probably go with a similar bet size. And Ivey's bait works. Hook, line, and sinker. Almost too well. Doug raises to $580K, making the pot over $1 million. Now, the pressure is back on Ivey, who has to consider whether Doug might have slow-played an overpair, or if he could have made a 3 of a kind. Minutes of agony follow, where Ivey has to weigh up his calculations with his instincts. It's a massive risk to call, but in the end, he makes the right decision, calling down Doug's bluff and collecting almost $1.5 million. This was an important turning point in the final stage of the tournament, which Phil Ivey ended up winning, which he has said in the past feels more like relief than joy. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe and comment below what was the craziest part of this video.